And you mentioned Daryl Brooks.
Yes, as a
How is that
comparison.
an
It's a
example?
it,
How is Daryl Brooks? Hold on, no, Andrew,
uh-huh.
answer my question. You mentioned it. How is that an example of left-wing extremism? Please
I
elaborate.
wasn't
Hey, welcome back to the channel, my friends. Today we're jumping into a heated roundtable where political commentators Soy Pill and UC Berkeley student John Paul go head-to-head with firebrand debater Andrew Wilson and streamer Vince Wilson, all arguing over one very loaded question: which side in America is actually more responsible for political violence? And trust me, things get personal, things get messy, and one of these guys gets completely caught off guard when he's asked to defend a case he referenced in his own opening statement. Make sure you stick around all the way through, because the second half of this clip is where the whole thing really cracks open, and I'll be reacting and breaking down every moment along the way. Also, before we get into it, drop a quick hello in the comments and let me know what city or country you're tuning in from today. I genuinely love seeing how far this channel reaches. Alright, enough from me. Let's get straight into it.
Yeah, just first off, I want to say, Andrew, you jumped ahead of yourself a little bit there. I'm not using the Cato Institute. I'm not using the ADL. I'm using the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which is the one that kind of...
Yeah, the CSIS.
Yeah, the CSIS.
Yeah, I got them in front of me.
You got them up? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That one maps up to the DOJ one as well, which is taken down, right?
Yeah. Would you like to go through the CSIS and look at all of the disputes and problems that I have with the CSIS study?
I would actually ask you to affirmatively show me any sort of study that shows that the right wing is overwhelmingly not the committers of violence. You can poke holes in anything, and I understand that, hey, this didn't include that. And you could have up to thousands of examples, but if there are thousands of examples of violence and your little discrepancies are well within the margin of error, unless you can provide me a study that shows that the right wing is not committing more violence, I'm sorry, I'm not going to play the, well, this doesn't count because I don't want it. So I'd love to see your study.
First, we need to make sure that we classify these things correctly. Can we classify what you and I, or what we and your side would consider to be right or left wing, and what would fit in that category, so that we can determine if those people who fit in that category are conducting violence or not?
I bet if we get into the definition game, we're going to be here for 2 hours, but we can try.
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty important that we understand that if there's people here who are being included who you don't even consider left-wing or right-wing, that they probably shouldn't be included to begin with, right?
Yeah,
and
like,
by the way,
hang on.
Let me finish. Almost done. I'll toss it back over. The biggest problem that you have with your frontal argument here is you're saying, on the positive front, if you don't show me studies, even though you're already disagreeing with the classifications in these studies, which are already out here, that somehow that means that we lose. That's absurd. I'm disagreeing with these classifications to begin with. And if you could show me the equivalent of your high-profile leadership getting shot and your president's almost getting murdered, I'd love to see it. But your studies, the studies which are used for this positive claim that right-wingers are doing it more, are very suspect.
Right. I'm not saying that if you can't give me a study that shows that left-wingers do it more, that you lose the debate. I'm saying that I have a classification that I mostly agree with that's used here. And if you have a different classification, or if you heavily disagree with this classification, I would love to see some evidence that uses your classification and also shows that left-wingers do it more.
Well, let's start with your truth claim.
If you were able to take the numbers out of this study and say, well, actually, I classify this differently, we can compare those two numbers, and then ultimately, like, I don't know, drop a new graph, like, sure, I could use that. That would be fine. But otherwise, I don't think there's a point in going through and saying, well, I have a minutia of problems with this classification. Therefore, especially when in my intro, I said specifically, if we want to get into the rhetoric and what is actually causing it, I think that's much more important, but we could do either one.
Well, the first thing that we would need to do is create these classifications to make these determinations, to make sure you even agree with them yourselves. Why is that so important? Because if your fucking assholes are going to be running around telling people that the right is committing much more political violence than the left, and then banking on studies as the thing which proves this for you, then you're going to need to demonstrate that first and foremost.
Okay, so right from the jump, you can see exactly what's happening here. And I want you to pay attention, because this is a debate tactic I've seen 1,000 times. Soy Pill comes in calm, prepared, and he's citing an actual academic institution. He said this: I'm not using the KO Institute. I'm not using the ADL. I'm using the Center for Strategic and International Studies. That is a respected, nonpartisan, well-known policy think tank. You cannot just hand-wave that away. And what does Andrew do? Instead of engaging with the actual data, he tries to flip the burden of proof. Listen to what Soy Pill had to say next. He goes, I would actually ask you to affirmatively show me any sort of study that shows that the right wing is overwhelmingly not the committers of violence. That is a fair challenge. If you're going to reject the mainstream consensus, you need to bring something to the table. You can't just stand there and say, "Nutch, ush." And here's the part that blows my mind. Andrew finally responds, and he says this: if you could show me the equivalent of your high-profile leadership getting shot and your president's almost getting murdered, I'd love to see it. Notice what just happened. He completely abandoned the statistical conversation. He moved the goalposts from pattern and data over to individual high-profile cases. That is a tell. That is what someone does when they know the aggregate numbers don't favor them. Then he pivots again and goes, the first thing that we would need to do is create these classifications. Bro, you are 45 minutes into a debate. You did not prepare definitions beforehand? You want to stop everything and litigate the meaning of every word? That is classic filibuster energy. That is what you do when you don't have the receipts. Soy Pill even called it out. He said the definition game will eat up 2 hours, and he was right. That was the whole point.
I think you ought to demonstrate how Daryl Brooks, who killed Sticks, was it was a politically motivated attack. Can you elaborate that for me, Andrew?
What's that?
Can you elaborate how Daryl Brooks, who killed Six, was a politically motivated attack? You mentioned him in your opening.
Oh no, I was making a comparison about how they don't make these classifications correctly by their own rules in that particular study. I'd have to bring both those studies up for the comparison, but that was the point I was making.
So Daryl Brooks' example was you just don't know nothing about that case then, right?
Can you repeat back what I just said, please?
I want you to answer mine.
Yeah, I know, but I need you to repeat back what I just said so that I know that you know what I just said. What did I just say?
You were trying to mention in your opening how these are glaring contradictions.
No, I didn't say that they're contradictions. You're a fucking idiot. What I said was that if you make a comparison, this thing over here is left-wing violence. This other thing that's exactly like left-wing violence is not left-wing violence. It's omitted, right? Then what I'm asking is that if we're going to make these types of comparisons, let's create a classification for what we consider left-wing to be, what left-wing violence is, and then see if I can go through an extensive list of left-wing violence and make sure that these things were actually included, because if not, we have glaring omissions. Do you agree?
Okay, and you mentioned Daryl Brooks.
Yes, as a comparison.
How is Daryl Brooks? Hold on, no, Andrew, answer my question. You mentioned it. How is that an example of left-wing extremism? Please elaborate.
I wasn't saying that it was. I was making a comparison that we can bring up all of these different names so that we can make a determination on if they are actually included as being left-wing violence, not left-wing violence, right-wing violence, not right-wing violence.
And you use Daryl Brooks. So answer the question.
What's the question?
Why did you use Daryl Brooks as a form of left-wing extremism?
I didn't.
Tell me about the case.
I didn't, you stupid fuck. I didn't.
Yes, you did. You did.
Okay, fine. Then I guess I'll clarify as much as I possibly can, since you have the IQ of the room that you're in. Very clearly, what I'm trying to do is establish a comparison contrast. Left wing versus right wing. And if we agree thing, left wing or right wing, and then we can determine if they in study or not in study. That's it.
Did you or did you not use Daryl Brooks as an example of left-wing extremism?
No, I don't think I did. I think I was making an example of comparisons.
Go ahead. We'll continue.
But in any case, I just clarified it 15 fucking times. If that's what you heard, then that's not definitely not what I meant. So who cares?
You did not do any basic research on what the Daryl Brooks case was about. So I'm glad. We'll continue. Go ahead.
Oh, this is where it gets good. This is the moment the entire debate cracks open. Soy Pill does something brilliant here. He takes Andrew's own example, the one Andrew brought up in his opening, and he asks Andrew to defend it. He said this: I think you ought to demonstrate how Daryl Brooks was a politically motivated attack. Can you elaborate that for me, Andrew? And you have to understand what just happened. Andrew brought this case up. He put it on the table. So now Soy Pill is saying, okay, you cited it, explain it. That is literally the baseline of a good faith debate. And Andrew immediately starts squirming. He goes, I was making a comparison about how they don't make these classifications correctly by their own rules. That is not an answer. That is word salad. That is someone realizing they referenced a case they know almost nothing about. Then Vince Wilson steps in and locks the door behind him. Vince said this, and I want you to hear it clearly. Andrew, answer my question. You mentioned it. How is that an example of left-wing extremism? Please elaborate. That is a clean, simple, direct question. A first-year debate student could answer it if they'd done their homework, and Andrew cannot. And here is the part that tells you everything about Andrew's character. Instead of saying, I didn't research that case thoroughly, my bad, let me move on, he goes, then I guess I'll clarify as much as I possibly can since you have the IQ of the room that you're in. Insults. That's the play. That is what grown men do when they get caught unprepared. They start attacking everyone else's intelligence because they can't defend their own argument. You have to understand something. When someone resorts to personal attacks this fast, it's not confidence. It's panic dressed up as aggression, and the viewer sees it instantly.
What does this have to do with anything? In fact, even better, let's say I'm completely ignorant on all of these cases. Then I guess going through each of them and determining whether or not they're left or right-wing violence would behoove both of us, wouldn't it?
I think that we should stay focused on less about these definitions, which we can get into, but it's just gonna be a semantic.
What is
argument.
more fucking?
I think we should stick to.
This is this is a semantical. This entire argument is semantics. Left wing versus right wing violence is completely 100% semantics. What else is it? What else is it besides semantics, bro?
Vince, the issue is that we're talking about the semantics because the studies are primarily focused on classification. They're not going to include the 2020 BLM and Antifa riots because property destruction, for some reason, lighting a building on fire is not political violence. But when a white supremacist who became a white supremacist in prison to survive commits assault on another prisoner, somehow that is political violence perpetuated by the right. And your burden is much, much more stronger than simply citing a number in a study. You can't just cite a number in a study, say, hey, look, this study based off of faulty classification shows that there's more political violence from the right. You can't just do that because you don't know the proper classifications of things. And when you do adjust for the classifications of things, you understand where the largest scale scope of political violence has occurred, which side it is from. And you see that the left has persistently, time and time again, excused, rationalized, stood in front of burning buildings saying the mostly peaceful protest behind me. And you go in there and you cheer with these studies and saying, like, look at this
Chuck
study.
Schumer
This is what I have.
said, that's great. So if you go to the BLM protest, you can see where Chuck Schumer actually came out and said that the small minority who have exploited the protests to wreak havoc and violence are wrong, and they are not taking part in the grand American tradition of First Amendment protests. That was from
So why do you think Kamala Harris
we also had
raised
Gretchen
bail
Whitmer.
funds
That's
for-
great. We still had Gretchen Whitmer.
That has
who
nothing to
said
do with
these
anything.
who have taken to the streets yes, because what it means is that the left, once again, as I mentioned, consistently condemns the rhetoric. I would encourage you to point out to me, for example, where you could maybe point to January 6th and say where Donald Trump condemned it, yet he then pardoned over 1,600 defendants. So again, you want to talk about how the left never condemns any of this rhetoric. There's several examples in which the left consistently condemns this rhetoric.
Now watch how Soy Pill handles the follow-up, because this is a masterclass in staying composed. Andrew gets cornered, so what does he do? He tries to dismiss the whole framework. Andrew said this entire argument is semantics. Left-wing versus right-wing violence is completely 100% semantics. No, sir, it is not semantics. Classifications are the entire foundation of how researchers measure political violence. If you don't define terms, you cannot measure anything. That's not semantics, that's methodology. And this is a guy who, moments earlier, was demanding everyone create classifications. Now suddenly classifications are semantic garbage. Which is it? Then John Paul jumps in with the classic move of trying to argue that property destruction during protests somehow doesn't count, while simultaneously arguing that incidents involving individuals on the right should count. That is the definition of an unfair scale. You cannot have two rulers, one for your side and one for everyone else. And here's what people don't realize about serious academic research on political violence. Respected institutions do separate rioting, looting, and property damage from ideologically coordinated political violence. That's not a loophole. That is standard criminology. If you go back and look at how historians study things like the Weather Underground in the 1970s or the anti-colonial violence studied in post-war Europe, researchers have always separated opportunistic destruction from organized ideological violence. This is not a new trick. And then Soy Pill delivers the cleanest contrast of the entire debate. He points out that Chuck Schumer, a sitting Senate leader, publicly said the small minority who have exploited the protest to wreak havoc and violence are wrong. He references Gretchen Whitmer condemning the same thing. That is on the record. That is documented. And Soy Pill closes it with this. The left, once again, as I mentioned, consistently condemns the rhetoric. When one side's leadership is publicly denouncing violence and the other side's leadership is issuing pardons and calling violent actors patriots, you do not need a Harvard study to see the asymmetry. You can see it with your own eyes. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.